Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going to be diving into a really fascinating piece of media criticism. We'll be looking at a recent article entirely through the crucial lens of journalistic fact-checking standards. Basically, we're going to break down exactly how this source text evaluates a high-profile interview and, honestly, more importantly, how it examines the core responsibilities of an interviewer. We're relying strictly on the text of this media critique to understand the relationship between political figures, the press, and, well, the truth. For anyone who consumes modern media, which, let's face it, is all of us, understanding the mechanics of how information is or maybe isn't verified in real time is an absolutely crucial skill. It's just a fantastic exercise in media literacy and accountability, so let's jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this. The source article definitely doesn't bury the lead here. The author opens with an incredibly blunt assessment, stating, "Another softball interview, another series of obvious lies from the president." Boom, that immediately hooks us right into the core of the media critique, doesn't it? The author is setting a very clear, highly critical tone from the very first syllable. From a media criticism standpoint, this is actually a super effective framing device. The author is making a direct claim, not just about the accuracy of the subject's statements, but about the structural quality of the interview itself. It's a powerful two-pronged critique. They're telling the reader right up front that the failure isn't just on the person speaking the words, but equally on the journalistic apparatus that's, well, failing to apply any friction to those words.
Section 1. A softball interview. Analyzing the journalistic approach. To really grasp the author's critique, we first need to establish exactly what they mean by a softball interview. In the context of this specific media critique, a softball interview is one where a subject's assertions go completely unchallenged by the interviewer. The event in focus here is President Donald Trump's Wednesday morning conversation with Miranda Devine. She's a conservative columnist for the New York Post and a podcaster. Now, the source article points out that the dynamic here lacked any essential journalistic pushback. But the author actually goes deeper than just noting a lack of interruption. The critique highlights specific moments where the interviewer didn't just stay silent, but actively agreed with or glossed over easily disprovable statements, just sort of moving the conversation along without applying the filter of independent verification. In the author's view, the main issue is that providing a platform without any interrogation fundamentally changes the nature of the broadcast. It goes from being an interview to just a simple transmission of unchallenged claims. It's that total absence of a critical journalistic filter that the article is really calling out here. Section 2. The unchallenged assertions. Claims without pushback. Now, what's really interesting about this part of the critique is, if the interviewer wasn't pushing back, what exactly was going unchecked? Well, the article doesn't just make some broad, vague complaint. It actually brings the receipts. It points to specific policy areas where it claims the conversation just went completely off the rails without any intervention from the host. According to the source, the interview featured what it describes as some of the president's longest-debunked false claims, and it categorizes them into three major policy buckets: elections, the economy, and immigration. The author doesn't just list these categories, though. They actually dive right into the specific fact checks. For instance, regarding the economy, the article notes a claim made during the interview suggesting past economic policies brought in unprecedented revenue without any cost to domestic consumers. The author's fact check immediately steps in to counter this, citing specific economic data and research demonstrating that those costs were in fact primarily borne by domestic buyers. Then, when it comes to the elections bucket, the source text highlights assertions made on the podcast regarding specific state-level ballot counts. The author debunks this by methodically citing the numerous official state audits that have repeatedly confirmed those initial counts. They note that the interviewer just allowed the original claim to float out into the ether without mentioning any of these established audits. And finally, on immigration, the article points to highly exaggerated statistics presented during the interview regarding demographic numbers at the border. The author pulls the actual official Customs and Border Protection data to show the true scale, context, and historical comparisons, definitively correcting the exaggeration. The critique emphasizes that in all three of these highly consequential areas, inaccurate comments were simply allowed to stand. The listener was given zero context, no correction, and absolutely no counter-evidence. The author highlights these very specific, highly documented topics to show the astonishing breadth of the assertions that completely bypass standard journalistic scrutiny.
Section 3. A media pattern. Establishing a trend in interviews.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the author wants us to understand that they don't just view this isolated Wednesday morning interview in a vacuum. Instead, they're diagnosing what they see as a systemic issue. The Wednesday New York Post podcast is placed right alongside a Fox News interview from just days earlier, on Saturday, which was conducted by Lara Trump. The author notes that in both of these instances, identical conditions were present. The source text details how on the Saturday broadcast, similar unchecked claims regarding energy policy and job creation figures were broadcast to literally millions of people. The interviewer in that setting, just like the podcast host on Wednesday, failed to provide real-time corrections or present any contrary data. By placing these two events side by side, the article is highlighting a broader trend where specific interview formats are consistently failing to apply basic fact-checking standards. It points to a media ecosystem where subjects can confidently present assertions, knowing for sure they won't face the friction of traditional journalistic follow-up questions. So it's not an anomaly. According to the source, it's a relied-upon strategy.
Section 4. The fact-check imperative. Why journalistic standards matter.
So, if the interviewers aren't going to verify the facts themselves, what exactly is the responsibility of the rest of the press? Well, the author explicitly lays out their purpose, stating, "Here is a fact check of some of his remarks. This is not intended as a comprehensive list." Basically, the article is stepping directly into the void left by the original interviewers to provide a targeted fact check. What makes his critique so compelling is how the author executes this imperative. They aren't simply saying, "That's a lie," and just moving on. No, they're actively demonstrating what good journalistic standards look like in practice. They are linking out to economic charts, they're pulling historical data, and citing established court records. They are doing all the heavy lifting that the article argues should have been done by the person holding the microphone in the first place. I actually love that they include the caveat that it's not intended as a comprehensive list, because it implies the sheer volume of claims requires a curated, focused approach. The publication is taking on the burden of proof, retroactively applying the rigorous, data-driven standards that were entirely missing from the initial broadcasts.
Wow, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today examining this critique. We went from defining the fundamental failures of a softball interview to exploring the author's really meticulous debunking of claims surrounding the economy, elections, and immigration. We've also seen how the source diagnoses this not just as a one-off, but as a broader pattern across different media networks. But all of this leaves us with a really critical underlying question to ponder. When assertions go unchallenged in interviews, how does it actually impact our understanding of the facts? If the primary filter of journalism is completely removed and interviewers act merely as amplifiers rather than investigators, how do we, as focused learners and consumers of information, sort out what is real from what is just rhetoric? It's an absolutely essential question for all of us to critically consider the next time we listen to a podcast, watch a news segment, or read an article. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating look at media accountability and fact-checking standards. Stay curious, keep analyzing the information you consume, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.